My grandpa is the motherfucking Zodiac Killer. Is the Zodiac Killer. My grandpa was the Zodiac Killer.
My grandpa is the Zodiac Killer.
He went over how he found out basically how it really looks like his grandfather is the Zodiac Killer. So I don't think you discussed it much on TikTok, but I was really curious, and we actually asked you this earlier, but how you kind of figured that out and got into this story.
Right, so I have a history in law enforcement. I was a cop for 10 years, and I ended up going to a fallen officer's memorial. And I was thinking to myself, like, why was I the only member of my family who was a police officer? And then as I was walking home from this memorial, I remembered that I had a grandpa that I wasn't close to after a certain age. That was Vallejo Police Department, which we happen to be standing in front of.
Right here.
So I went on Google and typed in Richard Hoffman, Vallejo Police Department. I was going through some of the news articles about him being shot and him getting promoted to detective. I was really happy. And then next thing you know, I see a link that says Zodiac Killer, Richard Hoffman. And I was just shocked. I couldn't stop digging. I stayed up all night. I didn't sleep. On other threads, other websites, Reddit's, Titkok, and I was convinced after like 13 hours of doing investigation, I was like, it was my grandpa.
So you put multiple pictures, I'll put them on the screen, and it does look shockingly similar to the description.
In regards to Richard wearing glasses, he had an astigma his whole life, and they wouldn't wear glasses because the flashes and the technology wasn't good enough, and it would be like a reflection off. So I think in all the pictures my grandpa took in real life, he would take off. And you could see him, he's a detective here in Vallejo. When he got promoted, he changed his whole entire look, grew his hair out, grew his mustache. You could see him holding his glasses here. So like he took it off before the photo, you know what I'm saying? But as he aged, you could see in all his older photos, he's wearing the glasses.
I was working as a patrol officer in the...
When he got promoted, he changed his whole entire look. You could see in all his older photos, he's wearing the glasses. So growing up, what I remember before my father got custody of me, we would spend the holidays at my grandpa's house. He loved the holidays. Halloween, Christmas, Easter's, that was my grandpa's thing, which is ironic because a lot of the Zodiac's killings were around major holidays. All I remember from my grandpa is him being really authoritarian. Like I'm talking about Germany, and my grandpa was really big into German history. He didn't respect women. He called my grandma girl instead of hey babe, hey wife. Any women in our family he referred to as that girl. Always felt superior to women. Things didn't go his way, getting loud, slamming cabinets, and then kind of storming off and doing his own thing. But now that I'm old enough to now I'm like, oh, he was like a manipulative, controlling man.
I know there was a lot with like handwriting, with the way he spelt things, with that stuff. So could you go over that a little bit?
Then I noticed a lot of the words that the Zodiac was misspelling were same things my grandpa was misspelling in his actual police reports that are on record. Like leaving the E on words like casings instead of dropping the E.
And you said like a double L.
And the double L, so they had the same linguistic errors. Very poetic, like my grandpa's police reports weren't just like police reports, it sounded like a poem. Like the peacocks were wailing at 9 a.m. and the wind was blowing over my face. And it's in the same tone that the Zodiac would write his letters. He was really bad at spelling and hated crossword puzzles. So he found a knack for math. Like he loved solving math problems and equations, and that's why he became a woodworker. He has a lot of numbers. And you could correlate that to the ciphers that the Zodiac was doing because he was so bad at spelling, he used a different way to speak to us.
And I originally thought these ciphers were more like puzzles, but they were straight up just like really complicated math equations, as you can see right here.
And then also we talked about this earlier, talking about the woodworking, how they couldn't find his fingerprints because he covered it with a cement.
Yeah, like a wood cement or a wood adhesive, which is really rare. And my grandpa was a woodworker. Yeah, so someone who's usually handling those type of supplies and substances, they know in their head, and if you're a cop, you know that fingerprints are a big part of a crime scene. Like, can you imagine a serial killer writing the reports for these murders? He was actually on set of the 2007 film The Zodiac as a law enforcement consultant. Pulling up, he was the one saying, no, this is where they were parked. So he was still hiding in plain sight, in control, narcissistic, egotistic. My grandpa was in the Navy, stationed in Nebraska, which where my mother was born. The base he was closed at the time closed down. And then he got stationed here. Sherry Bates, who was also from Nebraska, her brother and dad were in the Navy. she ended up dead a month after my grandpa moved back here. At the crime scene of Sherry Base, they found a Navy-style, military-style footprint. And then under the desk in the library where she died, they found a poem that's exactly like the Zodiac's writings moving forward in the future, and it was initialed RH, which is Richard Hoffman.
Then we got to the most compelling evidence.
And the way he like pulled up behind him, you guys watched him.
Yeah.
Well, he didn't even like right behind him. It was like the same way a cop car would park. They split the car for lighting so they could get a visual representation of everyone in the car. 11:50-ish is when Mike says they pulled up here, which is crazy because this is my grandpa's patrol area, and he was on the radio 5 minutes before the murders happened, and he drove through here and said there was no cars.
Yeah, I remember seeing that.
Mike was like, we were there at 11:50. Yes, we were already there. Why would he hide that? So it's like he doubled back. And if you watch the movie, remember the car came back.
Yeah, he drove by and then came back.
Yeah.
So
I'm thinking he did his little round, saw their car, called it on the radio, everything's clear, doubled back around, and that's when he was like, pop, pop, pop.
Wow.
Yeah.
Did you think he wanted people to catch him?
You think what?
Did you think he wanted people to catch him since he left like clues?
Yeah. Yeah. Which is crazy because the way he died, he was on a ventilator and couldn't talk. If he was dying slowly from cancer, I think he would have talked. Because he wanted to be known. He wanted to go out with the legacy. That was his whole thing in life, being in control, being at the top, being the detective.
Wow.
You know, being in charge of his household like in the most aggressive way. The fact that he was like on a breathing tube, I don't think he had the opportunity to tell his story.
Wow. That is, I always thought about that, like if he got older, like would he just spill it all?
To his account, he refers to Mike and said, Michael was originally in the back of the car, but when I pulled up, he was outside the car. So my question is, he's speaking as if he was there prior to him being there as in a cop like position. How did he know that he was in the back of the car then moved, unless he was the shooter?
So he came back around after he killed them. So did Mike how did that go?
No, so Mike didn't recognize the shooter when the shooting was happening because the light blinded them. 3-4 minutes later, Richard pulls up in his unmarked police vehicle in plain clothes, which is another reason that he probably was doing it that night, because he was on like plain clothes duty. He didn't render aid. He didn't call an ambulance. He pulled out a piece of chalk to outline Mike's body. Richard admitted to moving the body. He admitted to not doing CPR, moving Mike's body. He admitting to going through Mike's wallet. My grandpa's DNA is all over the scene. So no longer are we saying, oh, that's the Zodiac's DNA. We're saying, oh, that's the cop that arrived first. Of course his DNA is there. He pushed officers off the scene that arrived with him and said, no, I got it. In what right mind is there a possible double murder where you're sending away your backup?
Yeah.
Hey, I got this, guys. Go ahead and look for the car.
Crazy
while he's changing the scene up.
But they almost end the movie making it seem like it was Alan.
And the way they tied that together is Alan's middle name was L-E-I-G-H, Lee. So there was a guy who showed up to her house that she just moved into to go help her paint. And her sister said there was a guy there that wasn't invited who was known by law enforcement, and everyone referred to him as Lee. So that's where they got the Arthur tie-in. But I'm like, Richard's middle name was Lee as well. Wow. Yeah, and a lot of it had to do that scene with Darlene and Mike and her painting party. Her circle of friends were into drugs, like psychedelics. And why would Richard claim being at that painting party if there's like a bunch of drugs there? No cop, even Buzz, his partner, no cop is gonna claim being at a drug party, right? Be like, so they all try to distance themselves, and they all had their little secrets on the inside, and that's why everyone was hush-hush about it.
And I think the craziest thing, because we talked before, the craziest thing you mentioned was, Darlene had mentioned that it was Richard.
Right.
That's all she said about it. He just does. She never mentioned his name, but she said something about Richard. His name was Richard. I kept hearing his name Richard. And I think that was his name. She referred to him as Richard, the Zodiac Killer, the guy.
I also looked back a while and found this video of Darlene's sister interviewing Mike.
A grieving young woman confronts the one man who may know the identity of her sister's killer.
What happened? I'd like to talk to you. You know, Mike, there was a man that Darlene was very afraid of. And I believe you know who he is. Do you?
Yeah, I know a lot of that shit so long ago. I don't remember a lot of his names, to be honest.
It took me all this time to find you, and I want you to help me, and I know you can. You can't tell me you can't. You can't tell me you can't, Mike. I know you know who did it. I know you do.
But Majot was not helpful. Retired Vallejo detective Ed Rust worked the case and is convinced that Majot knew more.
I don't think he's telling the truth. I think, and I always have thought there's something that he's holding back, whether it's from a more, bigger degree of his involvement in whatever happened, or just plain pure fear.
It was Majot.
I thought it was very odd that everyone seemed to think that Mike knew a lot more and just was scared to say anything or had some reason to not say anything. And I think this would also point to it being a cop, because who would you be scared to rat out? A cop.
Do you think a lot of officers knew or had suspicions?
Of Richard, yeah, I think that they all were, because back then, as we spoke about, it was easier to get away with things, and I feel like they did have a good old boys club going on, which is why Buzz Gordon, the officer that arrived with Richard, they ended up getting into a fist fight like a week before the murder of Darlene, and Buzz was on his way out. Vallejo was trying to fire him for sleeping with underage girls.
There were also a couple of officers who were fired over a relationship with a 14-year-old girl.
At least one of those officers was questioned about his relationship with Darlene.
And Richard showed up and beat up Buzz. Richard ended up getting handcuffed, and he told Buzz, he's like, I'm gonna get you back. 4 days later, Darlene dies. And Buzz had an open relationship with Darlene. So I think they all had secrets. And if you tell this one little one, then it's gonna expose everybody else's secrets. That's why everyone asks, well, why did he just all of a sudden stop? Well, if you look at the timeline of events, the Zodiac wrote like a final goodbye letter in 1974, which was around the time my grandpa was getting promoted to detective. So now he's in this big chair with this throne in his own cute little office. He changed his look. He grew his mustache out. He divorced my grandma, found a new younger wife. So all these big changes were happening for him, and I think that's where he drew that validation from, was his new chapter, where he didn't need to do those things no more because there was so much more going on. Like, that was it for him.
Do you think that the killing was driven by that narcissism, or do you think it was like some weird, I don't even know what to call it, where it was like the one cipher that was revealed that was like
collecting slaves?
Collecting slaves for the afterlife?
I think what drove his murders were control. Man to woman. If you notice, most of the men that he assaulted survived, except the cab driver he shot in the back of the head. And that he took it all out on the women that were with those men. So I think what drove him was feeling in control of those young, vulnerable women.
Why do you think Richard has ever been like really looked into?
I think a lot of people dismiss it because the timeline that he created was skewed. They said he was at the hospital and announced Darlene's death at 12:40. And I think that instantly says there's no way he could have made the phone call from the payphone across from Vallejo Police Department when the phone call came in. There's two, but I think they're forgetting that Richard made that timeline. Richard wrote that report.
Yeah, that makes everything so much harder.
But as days went on, I have found the craziest evidence that I can't even believe that it's a connection. And I'll give you a little hint. It has to do with the one time that he wore a costume. A couple of the victims that I'm talking to, or the victims that passed away, some of their families have reached out to me and they're sharing decades of information that they have stocked up in their files, digging into my grandpa's military record and all that stuff. So I got a couple sources, and then even people who were reporters here in Solano County back in the 70s, they lost their jobs, but they have a whole storage unit with evidence pointing towards Richard. And when I tell you, it's so compelling that I want everyone to feel what I'm feeling. Like, without a shadow of a doubt, there's no ifs, ands, or buts. It was Richard Hoffman. And I know that. With everything that I already gathered and the dots I've already connected, I'm not 99.9 no more. I'm 100%.
Wow.
Yeah, we're gonna solve it.
Oh yeah.
This is gonna be solved. And how many people are left without closure that have been looking for it for years, and they're on their way out? You know what I mean? Some of these people are 70 years old, 75. If this could be their final check in the box, where they're like, thank you for what you did. I did.
It's such a good goal. Thank you again for
sure, man.
for coming to talk about this. Yeah, massive stuff planned. Go follow him. J Foy on everything, I guess.
JFoy _3.0. Yep.